Hi, I'm Susan. Welcome to my studio. Today I want to show you how to make these fun little berries, whether you want little ones or larger ones like this. This is a pin that I've created, and I'm going to show you how I create it. This one is unglazed and this one is glazed. I wanted to keep the unglazed one to show you the difference of when you glaze these beads, how realistic they look. Now, I intentionally did not glaze most of my pieces because they photograph better, but I did want to show you the difference and how really beautiful they come out once they're glazed. Now, you're going to see I add a little bit of glitter and some gold leaf to my clay, and that's what gives this kind of like sparkly iridescent to it. And it's not a very difficult trick. It's actually quite simple, but you can see how even with the matte clay, you see the little specks a whole lot better. Well, in real life, you can see that even nicer with the glaze on it, but the camera keeps reflecting off of it, so it doesn't show you as well. That's why I wanted to keep them separate. So let's get started because I can't wait to make some strawberries with you. Now, to start my strawberries that I'm going to form by hand, I am starting out with some translucent clay. This is just a package of translucent clay I've sliced up. I've got some pomegranate clay, and I'm going to add about that much. This is pretty thin. This was probably rolled out on a number 3 or 4, so just to give you an idea, it's not much clay. If I thicken it up, it'd probably be about equal in proportion to those. And then I'm going to add a little bit of Azurine Crimson. And you probably wonder why, because I don't want this to come up too orangey. I want it to come up a little bit more cherry color, strawberry red. So I'm adding that much, which if I thicken it up so it's the same thickness as the others, it's about that much, just to give you proportion. And because I can, I'm going to add a little bit of silver leaf. And you probably wonder, why am I not adding gold leaf? When you're working with pinks, gold leaf has a tendency to turn things yellow. It can make a lot of your colors more salmon-y than cherry. So I just wanted that extra sparkle. Now I've got that red mixed, and I like to mix it on a 3 or a 4 just because it mixes faster if you go on a lower setting. Now I'm just going to add my glitter in. And this is not something that's going to be blatantly obvious and really glittery because the translucent clay kind of settles it out. But it does have that neat little sparkle to it. So now you can see I've got my glitter on there. See, I like to spread it out and then fold it over. And make sure you seal the ends so that it doesn't fly everywhere because it can really mess your studio up. So that's how I make my strawberry red. Now this will always bake a little bit darker than the color it is, but I love the way it's got the little bit of sparkle and a little bit of something extra to it. It doesn't have to be so realistic all the time. Sometimes we can just make it a little bit more fun. And since I do this in jewelry, I like having that little bit of extra sparkle. Now that I've got my clay all rolled out, this is on the thickest setting. I'm just going to take some circle cutters. I like to just use random ones. This is for a smaller strawberry. This is for a larger strawberry. Really depends on how big you want your strawberries, what you're using them for, whatever. But these strawberries would be super cute in a cha-cha style bracelet. You can use these hanging from a necklace as a little charm kind of thing. So many cool things. You can use them in earrings. They make just the cutest beads. So if you're not into caning, this is an alternative. Also, I like to mix these with my cane. Just an alternative if you don't want to cane them. It gives you more dimensional. I like them both ways, to be honest. So now that I've got all my little circles, I am just going to form little berries. And I start out by making a ball. And now this, you don't want to be too teardroppy, too perfect. You just want to make it a little bit rough. If you do it too perfectly, it won't look so natural. Now to add those little pricklies on it, I'm just taking my needle tool and working all the way down. This is where the time comes in. Now there we've got our base of our strawberry. So I'm going to continue that with all of these pieces and be right back. Now I have all of my little strawberries formed. And I've made a larger strawberry because I want to show you how to make a pin out of this. And I think it's just easier to see how the larger strawberry comes out. Now, I have some pan pastels here. This is Permanent Red Extra Dark. And I just want to add a little bit of shadowing, just to add a little bit more definition, because strawberries are really not one color, they're multiple colors. And so you could add white or green or whatever different colors you want, but just to add that little bit of definition changes it up quite a bit. This one I'm going to make a pin out of. So you're probably wondering, why does she have it round? You'll see in a second. But with the smaller ones, I'm going to do that exact same thing and just add a little bit of darkness to them. And if you wanted, you could add a little light green, anything you want to them, but it adds just a little bit more realism by just adding that little bit of shadow to them. You can also use eyeshadow for this. That would work pretty well. Anything that will give a little bit more hint of color, because if you really look at strawberries, look at how much more natural that looks with just adding that little bit of shadow on it, just by adding that secondary color, even though we mixed some colors, so we've got a little bit more texture to it. Adding that shadow will add that extra depth. So I'm going to continue to cover all of these, and I'll be right back and we can add the stems. I just want to show you how to add extra definition, and even though we've got that gold leaf in there, it does look like the little flecks in a strawberry, those little gold seeds, and that's what I was going for without adding all that extra work. So I'm going to continue this and I'll be right back. Now, to create our little toppers, hats as I call them, I'm just going to make a quick Skinner blend. So I've got two little pieces here of yellow and green, and I'm just going to put them together. So I will blend these together, folding them over on themselves, and be right back so I get that nice blend that will give us a much nicer little hat for each of our strawberries. Now I have my blend all done, but it's not close enough for me to cut those little tops out of. So what I'm going to do is fold it into a long strip, and I will run this through on my pasta machine on a number 1 to a number 4, and then fan fold it and then run it through so I get a narrower strip that has those 3 colors across, because that's really what we need to cut these out of. Now I'll run it through on a 2, a 3, and down to a 4. Do it slowly, don't try to go 1 to 4 or it will squish it all up and be hard to fold. I'm just going to do a quick fan fold, and that will bring those colors closer together, which will make it easier for us to work with these. And if this isn't close enough, we can still squish it down before we roll it out, because this is still quite far apart. So now what we're going to do is use the table to press it, and now you can see how you can change the shape of it. It's all just how you fold and manipulate the clay to get those colors in the position you want them. So now you can see how I've got those colors blended much closer together, and that's probably a good distance there. Now I will run this through on a number 1 and then back down to 2 and 3 on my pasta machine and be right back. I have a nice strip, and I'm going to work on the larger one just because I think it's easier for you to see. I'm just going to take my little strip and cut out my petals. And see, this way I can make them all different sizes, which will be more natural. And I can get those darker and lighter shades for my little cap. I think of these as a hat. Now I'm just going to take my needle tool and just score the center of that little leaf. And just slowly add them to the top. And if you want, you could feather them out for this larger one. With the smaller ones, it won't show, but with the larger one, you can feather that out, making it look more like a leaf. And since I did it to that one, I have to do it to this one. And just slowly add them in here. And it's the same with the smaller ones, we're just adding smaller leaves. You can start to see how that's changing that up already. So I'll just continue adding these leaves. And I'm always keeping the dark towards the inside and the lighter color towards the outside. And now you can see how I'm getting my strawberry. And if you're wondering, how am I going to make a pin out of this? Let me show you. I am literally just going to slice this in half. And that way, I can make each one a little bit different. And if you want to add a few more leaves, if you want, you can even add a little stem at the top. But now you can see how I would get a pin out of that, because this would be my base, and we could add the pin back to this after it's baked. I'm never going to add the pin back until I bake this. Here's a tile. I would put it on my tile and bake it like this, and then I'll show you how I add the pin back. But I want to show you how I'm going to distort this one. I want this one to be a little bit more fat and squatty, just because I don't want them to look exactly like they're the same strawberry. This way, if I have a set of them, they look a lot cuter. See how that comes out? Now I'm just going to add a few more leaves to that, and then I'll bake it. So I have two different strawberries. I don't want them to be symmetrical. If you want them symmetrical, you'll be fine cutting it in half, but I prefer them not to be symmetrical. It's really personal taste. So I'll add some of those top pieces. I just like the way they curl up a little bit on the top here. You don't have to have them do that. That's just my thing. So now you can see how I get a different look to that one. Let me add a little stem to it. I do like the little stem. It looks like the little jewel on a hat. That piece I make a little bit thicker, only because I don't want it to break off. And there you can see how I've got my larger strawberries. So for the smaller ones, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Now, I probably will have to put this on a thinner setting for the smaller strawberries, but for the larger ones, I can just make small little pieces. These don't all want to pop out, but that's okay. We can coerce them out. Sometimes on the thinner setting, they can be very delicate. So I'm just going to take this and press just my needle tool into it and press it down. This is on a number 4 setting, just to remind you. This is why I felt the larger one was easier to see. And there we have our little strawberry. Now, I like to skewer mine before I bake them. I skewer all my beads. You can always drill a hole in them later on if you want it larger. Usually the skewer works for me for just some wire or thread work. And then you don't need to bake it on the skewer. It doesn't change size or anything. In fact, I find if you bake them on the skewer, they're really hard to get off. So here's just a piece of t-shirt that I've cut. And I usually make what I call a little nest and just place them in my nest to bake, and that's all you have to do. The temperature of the oven does not get hot enough to make this ever start flaming or anything, just make sure you don't have anything hanging over the edges so that it would hit the heating element. As long as you keep the fabric away from the heating element, it'll be fine. You can also use cornstarch. I just find that to be messy. This is something I was throwing away an old t-shirt, so I don't really find it a problem to just bake on it. And that's all there is to it. So I'm going to finish up making all these strawberries and baking these, and I'll be right back. Now to do the smaller ones, I'm just going to cut a little leaf. Now you could use the tiny micro cutters. I just find it's easier to just use my X-Acto knife. I can get them each a little different. I'm not really big on making them perfect and matching. They don't look as natural that way. I prefer to just have them a little bit different each one. I'm making basically a little star at the top and just taking my needle tool and pressing that in and forming those leaves. So now it has its little cap, and I'm just taking a skewer and skewering through. Now, even if you're going to drill this later on, I always find that skewering the hole gives that drill a guideline to follow. Otherwise, it may not come out the point. This can be very tricky to drill this. It's like a pod where they come out the sides or something. At least if you sometimes have the pilot hole, you have a better chance than if not. I find this skewer, that these are Amico skewers, they work great as the size of a 24 gauge wire or for needle and thread. They're perfect. You don't really need to re-drill this unless you're going to pass through it multiple times. But now I have my 2 little strawberries baked, and I want to add a pin back. Here I've got a basic pin back. You can find these anywhere. This one, I want to make sure that it goes that way. I want to make sure the clasp is at the bottom. A lot of you forget about that. You put the clasp at the top. Well, if it undoes, then the whole thing falls right off. Gravity will take it down. If the clasp is at the bottom, because you're probably going to hang it this way, you may put it at an angle or something, you want to make sure that it will stay in place. So I always try to put the clasp at the bottom so that I know it's in that space. Now I'm just going to take a little poly paste. And if you don't have poly paste, you can make some just by using some translucent clay and liquid clay. Just chop it up, let it sit overnight, and it turns into this thicker kind of paste. The liquid clay has a tendency to slide off, with the paste stays on a lot easier, so that's the reason that I prefer the paste. Now I'm going to take my little piece here, and I am going to cut a little spot right there and right here where I can fit this through. Now the other way to do it is, some people just like to take a piece of clay and patch it over that. I'm kind of more picky. I prefer to fit it through the clay before I start, and it's also easier if you open this. That way I can fit the pin back through and the clasp. Now I'll put this on top of my strawberry, and I still won't clasp it. I want to make sure I'm covering it, it's in the right position. And what's easy to make sure you've got it in the right position, just press the clay down the edges, and that will help you get your positioning better. Now I'm just going to take a clay blender and push those seams back together. I'm not really fond of the taking a piece of clay and slapping it on top, just because I don't like the way it looks. It's probably the easiest way, but I just don't like the way it looks. Now right here, I've got a little bit of extra clay. I'm just going to cut that out. Make sure you don't have too much clay here that your clasp doesn't work. It's real important that you check that before you bake it. Each one's a little different. Sometimes there's just a latch clasp. Other times it's a little hook there. Just make sure there's enough room. Now just basically blending this out with your finger. See, I've got that little piece that has to fit in there. So I'm going to have to cut a little hole for that. because otherwise that piece may crack the clay after time. But I prefer to have this not be so obvious that I just slapped it on there. And sometimes your finger's easier to blend it. But you can always take your needle tool and make a pattern if you wanted to. I'm just more concerned that this back looks like it's part of the front, that it's just one piece. Now, because of this little spring here, I'm just going to cut a little piece out. Otherwise, that spring where it sits will just keep banging at the clay until it breaks. And I don't want it to crack this piece of clay that goes across, so it's just easier to cut that out. Now I'll put that latch back in, take my razor, and just trim around the edge. Now if you wanted, you could change this to the green clay in the back. I'm going to leave it the red. I don't see that anyone will see it, that it would make enough of a difference. It's really more personal taste. And now it's just a matter of blending the seam in. So you just want to trim around that. Now this piece right back here is rather important because that's a really weak piece, that little stem. You want to make sure you support that. So I'm just taking a little bit of time cleaning up in the back here. And right here, just blending it in with that other clay. You can see that this is a little bit lighter. It bakes a little bit darker. And I'll just take my needle tool and add a few more little seed holes, just so that blends a little better. But now you can see I have a seamless blend from the back to the front. So I'll just bake this, and it will bake the same color as the strawberry, so you won't even notice it. But it gives you a beautiful seamless blend this way, just putting one big piece on the back. Now here's just a simple pair of little stud earrings that I've created just using those half of strawberries. So you don't have to use always the whole strawberry. Just cut them in half and you can put them in all of your different work. Here I've created a pair of earrings just using this kind of a rainbow shape cutter. I wanted to use some different cutters. As you can tell, I'm getting kind of bored with the same ones. And I love the full strawberry hanging from the middle as a little dangle and the halves at the tops. So just cut your strawberries in half after you create them, and they work perfectly as an embellishment for all of your clay work. Here's my favorite pair. I'm not sure if I can give these up. I just love these. They have such a fun and whimsical look to them. I love the strawberries mixed with the flowers. It gives such a really cool effect. And what's nice about this is they're actually still quite lightweight. All I did was hook them together with 2 jump rings, because I couldn't figure out once I started to put the little loops in, how was I going to get this to flip around? So I just added a little jump ring in between each of these. I'm not a big fan of adding the jump ring just through the clay in the middle there. If you did it with something like this, you'd have to get such a large jump ring that it almost looks awkward. So I prefer to just do the little loops with a tiny jump ring in between. It just seems a little bit more like a chain that holds them together. So this was just a different shape, and it really kind of talked to me because it had like a fluffy cloud-shaped rainbow, and I really liked that because it gave you so many options to do with designs. And here's my last pair. I wanted to cut these videos up into 2 videos because not everybody does caning, and I love the way these earrings fall. I wanted to show you how gravity hits them, that they fall like a waterfall of strawberries. And I could have added flowers in with them, but I just really liked the berries. They just had such a fun, whimsical look to them. Very springy. Could wear them all year round, but just something a little bit different. And these are the unglazed strawberries, so you can see the little specks of gold leaf in them. The glaze made them too shiny for the camera, so I left them all matte. I actually really like the way they looked matte. They looked so natural and fun. So I hope I gave you lots of ideas and inspiration, and go grab some clay and make some strawberries because you won't be able to stop either. They're so much fun. Thanks for watching.